Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we'll do our fifth and final 2024-25 winter look ahead. Now we're going to sum up all the latest ECMWF data that gets us all the way towards the middle part of January to try and build an expectation of the early part of winter. We will have more updates coming out in the coming weeks, but this is the last one that is before the official start of meteorological winter. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what the latest charts are showing, because of course we had an update a couple of weeks ago and it did show the risk of something colder in the lead up to Christmas, and we'll try and compare that data to what we're looking at today. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. Now, of course, we're coming off the back of some pretty disruptive weather in the past week to 10 days, with Storm Bert through the weekend, and of course the cold weather for the week prior to that. Now, that colder weather did crop up in our winter look-aheads about a month or so ago, and it was pretty well modelled by those longer-range charts in terms of sort of the anomalies indicating blocking up towards Greenland. And we thought perhaps it could last a little bit longer, but traditionally with those longer-range charts, they are fairly strong at getting sort of the overall schemes and the overall patterns, but sometimes you struggle with kind of longevity and intensity of high pressure blocks or areas of low pressure. So we did expect it to last a little bit longer than the sort of 5, 6, 7 days we got, but still it was pretty well modelled from these longer range weekly anomaly charts. So it does give me fairly good trust in them for the coming weeks. Now, in the last update we did about a week or two ago, we did see a pretty strong blocking regime for early to mid-December. Now, I've already flicked through the charts, and it looks like that sort of blocking pattern is still going to be there, but it might be delayed a little bit, maybe just in time for Christmas. And I'll try and explain, especially in the second half of the video, why that may be occurring. Now, if we're looking at the latest weekly mean anomaly charts, the base time is from the weekend, and this is for this week we are in now, Monday the 25th to Monday the 2nd. We've got high pressure over the top of us, low pressure coming in off the Atlantic, and this is pretty much what we're expecting, a very changeable pattern with still some blocking to our north, but not strong enough to force anything majorly cold. Now, it's the first full week of December we do see the Atlantic properly power up, but high pressure is still lingering around, still trying to extend to our north. And again, this is the sort of runs we've been seeing with high pressure building over much of northern and western Europe, giving kind of a frosty, drier spell. But you can see that the risk of westerly flows dominating is very possible here for the first full week of December. Now, the following week, as we head into the middle of December, low pressure firmly heads towards Greenland. High pressure does start to sink slightly further southwards, and this is the chart where we would expect a fairly strong westerly flow. Again, high pressure is very close by, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some drier, frosty, colder conditions, but we're not expecting anything wintry at all with this, a fairly bog standard westerly pattern. So this is quite a big contrast to what we saw in the prior update, where this was the kind of time period where we saw that block developing to our north. But look what happens in the following week. That big blue anomaly towards Greenland disappears, and we start to see blocking extending further northwards, especially towards Scandinavia. Now, I wouldn't say this is traditionally a very cold chart here for the full week leading up to Christmas, but it is kind of a transitional chart. That's what I'm kind of seeing here, where it starts very mild and westerly, transitions to something a lot more blocked, and the reason for that is because over the Christmas week, look at this, a massive block up towards Greenland, Iceland and Scandinavia, and we would be expecting northeasterly or easterly winds with this sort of scenario, and yeah, it would be a very interesting watch over Christmas. So that block we saw a couple of weeks ago in our last winter update hasn't disappeared, it's just been delayed a little bit, and I'll try to explain why I think it's been delayed in a few moments time. But yeah, definitely a strong suggestion here that we could be pretty cold for Christmas. Whether it be wintry, it's impossible to say, but this sort of chart, it's got very low possibility of being mild. It definitely looks well below average, at least a frost around and cold overnight temperatures. And of course, if a cold air mass moves in from the north or the east, it could be very cold. Now, as the first full week, or the prior week, getting into early January, you can see potentially a bit of a breakout from the Atlantic. We see that blocking disappearing a little bit towards Iceland, but still over the top of us and towards Scandinavia. So still would expect easterly winds may come up against some resistance from the Atlantic though, and unfortunately can't get to the subsequent week. But nonetheless, very interesting. Definitely starts mild and westerly, expecting potentially some stormy weather and some above average temperatures in the next sort of 2, maybe 3 weeks. But definitely changeable, as we've seen from our daily videos. Definitely are colder opportunities there, but I don't think anything overwhelmingly cold or sustained is looking likely. But in that week leading up to Christmas and the week of Christmas, definitely a fairly strong signal here that it could go cold or even very cold, especially as we are into the proper winter period. Of course, any sort of colder spell during the actual winter months are always the most intense, because not only do we have very weak sunlight and sun strength during the December period and January period especially, we've also got very short days, so very long nights, meaning cooling is exacerbated. And of course, the air masses to our north are getting towards their peak. For sort of the northern hemisphere, it's normally January through to February where we got the coldest air masses to our north, and kind of the sweet spot is in that January point. But mid to late December can't get too far from being the coldest point of the year. So definitely a very strong possibility here. And of course, it would be a lot more intense than any cold spell, than the cold spell we saw last week, simply because it is about a month later, if this did occur. I do want to go over and try to explain why I do think we're going to see a big westerly fest. And that is because, look at this. This is the mean zonal winds at 10 HPA. The polar vortex, the strength of those winds high up in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, that we have talked about numerous times over the past few years, really. Again, normally look at it in a bit more intrigue when it's much weaker than average, but here you can see it is very strong, not record-breaking strength, but definitely very strong over the next couple of weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's contributing to the very strong westerly winds. Now, it does weaken by Christmas into the start of the new year, not substantially, but near enough to getting towards average again. So again, there is a possibility that this takes over, but it's been fairly disconnected over the past sort of few weeks from the troposphere, and that's why we've had the opportunity to see high pressure, cold conditions. Remember back in early November, for a couple of weeks, we saw a massive block that gave no sunshine for like 2 weeks in some areas of the south. That is not what you'd expect with a very strong jet stream and very strong polar vortex. So it's not really been at play much, but I wouldn't be surprised if the next couple of weeks it kind of kicks into gear and we see a connection between the troposphere and the stratosphere in the start of December, and it really allows that jet stream to power up. We still saw though from those pressure charts a few moments ago, they're not completely dominant. High pressure is still around, so the jet stream and the polar vortex isn't completely taking over, but definitely having more of an influence. Now, if you look at the 2-meter temperature anomalies, you can see over the next week or so, we are expecting above average temperatures, and that's going to continue we're expecting over the next couple of weeks above average temperatures, and that is going to continue for the next couple of weeks. Interestingly, watch Greenland. That's why we've got blues here, and that is indicative of, again, a strong jet stream, low pressure pouring out of the Arctic with very cold air, combining in the Atlantic and giving us a very strong jet stream. Same with sort of northeast Canada. We'd expect to see these cold pools coming out into the Atlantic, and that spins up into low pressure systems, and equally we'd expect cold air towards Eastern Europe. We've got a European high with a strong westerly flow. We'd expect the cold side of that high to be across Eastern Europe here, and that's exactly what we're seeing from this chart. Now, the subsequent week, still a fairly similar chart. Yes, of course, the anomalies are slightly weaker, and that's because it is slightly longer term, but very similar. Much of Northern Europe is fairly mild, not record-breaking or anything exceptional, but a couple of degrees, 1 or 2 degrees at least above average. Now, as we head into the lead up to Christmas, we start to see a bit of a change. Yes, still some of those colder pools towards Greenland and out towards northeast Canada, but they're not quite as strong, or nowhere near as strong. The same out towards Eastern Europe. That blue area and white area of average temperatures starts to migrate further westwards, and that would indicate that the high pressure is trying to move northwards, and it's starting to pull in an easterly flow for parts of Europe. Now, watch what happens in the next frame. Look what happens across much of Europe. We go towards average. Greenland, Scandinavia and Iceland, bar from a few little small patches, are well above average. So to me, that would indicate that that high pressure that sat over us and towards our south has migrated northwards. We'd be pulling easterly winds, and that's why much of Europe has gone towards average. And as I stated over the past few winter look aheads, in the longer term with these weekly anomalies, because of how we've got global warming and how that's factored into the models, it is very unusual to see blues. You can see hardly any blues on here at all. So when we're looking for cold weather, we're looking for just not red, essentially. And that's exactly what we're seeing here through much of Europe. Whether it brings very cold conditions to the UK is impossible to say, but it definitely looks like Europe, as we head towards the Christmas period, will be going much colder. And I think it would be as a result of those easterly winds with that big high pressure block to our north. Still blues coming out of North America, perhaps indicating that we've got a big pull, a big area of the polar vortex into North America. That could excite the jet stream and create some complications for the new year. But at this stage, definitely cold and blocked. And then the same could be said into the first week of January. Again, lots of the North Atlantic is fairly mild, still fairly mild and warm to our north, and still much of Europe is cold, indicative of easterly flow. Cold air coming in from Russia, Siberia and the Arctic, moving through Eastern Europe into Northern Europe as well. Again, it's not going to be that simple. There's going to be lots of complications. There's going to be low pressure systems around, storm systems essentially, that could all throw a spanner in the works. But that's kind of the general overview I'm seeing here. Now, the best way to back that up is actually by looking at the precipitation. Now, you may be asking, why are we looking at precipitation? There's no way the models can predict precipitation accurately more than even a few days in advance. Now, this is looking for anomalies. We're looking for where can we see above average or below average? And again, it gives us a strong indication of where colder, drier air masses are, where's warmer, milder, and more humid air masses. And of course, also correlates with the positioning of high pressure and lower pressure. And then you can see here for the coming week, lots of greens out in the North Atlantic towards the UK. Greens here above average precipitation, orange are below average. So you can see much of Northern Europe here, North and Western Europe, and the North Atlantic is dominated by greens, which again is indicative of a very strong jet stream and lots of low pressure. As the first full week of December, that continues again. Fairly strong westerly flow, lots of rain, lots of stormy conditions, and you can see exactly where the jet stream track is, coming out of northeast Canada through the UK and up towards Scandinavia. Expecting high pressure towards the Mediterranean, southeastern Europe, up towards northern Europe, and we'd expect an easterly or northerly flow on that backside, and that's why it goes colder towards southeastern Europe, and especially out potentially towards Eastern Europe as well. Now, as the following week, the lead up to Christmas, still very wet and windy towards the UK and Northern Europe in general, and again, it doesn't look particularly cold at all. But look what happens the following week, the lead up to Christmas. Those signals diminish quite significantly. It starts to turn drier across Northern Europe. Still, the Atlantic is a bit wet, still towards Iceland. So perhaps, again, low pressure still lingering. But the following week, a very strong signal here for Northern Europe to be much drier than average. And again, that could indicate that a much colder, drier air mass moves in here for the Christmas week. And again, it would be cold and potentially blocked. And you can see exactly what we're thinking here. Low pressure coming out of northeast Canada getting split, the jet stream getting split in two, northern edge going up towards Greenland, southern edge going down in towards the Mediterranean, and that's why there's all sorts of greens here. And then towards Northern Europe, high pressure is dominating and easterly winds. So that is what this model is showing today. Again, it is weekly mean anomalies, so it is anomalies between a bunch of ensemble runs, but nonetheless, it is pretty primed for something colder as we head in towards Christmas. Now, the next chart is the weather regimes. Now, we looked at this in the last winter look ahead, and I did do quite an in-depth explanation of this, so do check that out if you want an explanation of exactly what each of the colours mean. But essentially, if we're looking for cold weather, we're looking for greens, and we're looking for reds. Mild weather, you're looking for blues, you're looking for no regime, and then purples is Atlantic ridging. So there's possible for a bit of colder weather, but nothing major. Now look at the next couple of weeks. It is very blue. Now, in the last update, we actually saw quite a bit of red there around that sort of 10th to 20th of December. Not seeing that now, so indicative of that cold weather and that block getting pushed away for the time being. So the next few weeks does look fairly positive NAO dominated, which is strong jet stream, strong gradient in the North Atlantic, expecting wet, mild and windy conditions. Now, it's not a 100% chance, there is still lots of reds around and lots of no regimes, so a mixed pattern it could occur. Yes, there could be colder weather within that, but we would expect to be seeing, a different signal. Would we expect to see greens or reds here if we were seeing sort of another proper colder spell, anything longer than a couple of days. But look what happens around the 20th, 21st of December. We just see a massive block of red, and the blues go down to sort of 10, 20, maybe 25% instead of the 40 to 50% that we have in the next couple of weeks. So that tells me that, very similar to what we just sort of had a look at on the pressure charts, the precipitation, the temperature, this sort of idea that we got from those, it is exactly what we're seeing here. Block appearing as we head into the final sort of 10 days of December into early January. Now that is, of course, like 3 weeks away, but these models are fairly strong at predicting. As I said, we had a fairly strong prediction for the colder spell we've just seen. Again, didn't get the exact timings correct, didn't get the exact intensities and longevity, but it predicted block towards Greenland towards the end of November or start of December. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw a big block. It was a bit earlier than anticipated, and it did last about a week, and we thought maybe it could last 2 or 3 weeks. So again, doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen around Christmas. Could be delayed, it could come early, or it could only be sort of 3 or 4 days. Who knows? But definitely a strong signal here from the latest ECMWF ensembles. Now, I just want to finish by looking at something which is kind of playing into the hands of this, is the MJO. Now, I don't frequently talk about this because it is a little bit complicated and it is a little bit long-winded, but essentially we're looking at the different phases here, 1 through to 8, and they are to do with convection out in the Pacific. Now, over here I've got a Met Office page. You can have a look at this if you want, just searching the MJO Met Office, and it gives you a very in-depth description of exactly what the MJO and how it works. But essentially, it's enhanced tropical rainfall, as you can see here from the top, that is over the Indian Ocean. Thunderstorms developing. And of course, those thunderstorms, major convection, big clouds that could eventually turn into tropical cyclones, has an impact on the upper air winds. And exactly where that convection takes place, that has a knock-on effect within the overall atmosphere across the globe. So we've got different phases, and this is where the enhanced convection is, where those thunderstorms are occurring. You've got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now, you can see here there's loads of effects around the world, again on different areas, monsoon season, Atlantic hurricane season, maybe even sudden stratospheric warmings. But there is definitely a strong correlation between what we see in the UK in regards to the jet stream. So you see here, when the MJO is in its active phase of Indonesia, we could get a negative NAO a few weeks later. And interestingly, look, a positive NAO is preceded by phases 3 and 4. A negative NAO tends to be preceded by phases 6 and 7, and that would present blocked conditions and potentially something colder and drier. And it normally has a knock-on effect of 10 to 12 days. Now, this is the latest MJO forecast, and exactly what we're seeing at the moment is phases kind of 3 and 4. So we'd expect to see a knock-on of fairly mild, wet and windy positive NAO, and that's exactly what we're seeing. But look at the forecast over the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks. So the next 20 days, we're getting out towards kind of 10th to 15th of December, and the forecast from quite a few ensemble members is for us to get into phases 6 and 7, which again precedes potentially more of a blocked pattern in the North Atlantic, negative NAO, colder and dry conditions. And of course, 10 days beyond that, we're getting toward Christmas. So definitely, again, the MJO could be one of those factors, similar to how the polar vortex could be driving it slightly milder at the moment. The MJO is another factor that could be giving that very mild, wet and windy conditions at the moment, or give an indication of that, help that along, and that could potentially develop and allow that blocking patterns to potentially develop once again as we head towards Christmas. So all these things coming together, it is a bit of a puzzle, and we're trying to fit it together, and we'll continue to have some more updates out over the coming weeks. Might even have another longer range update out next week just to compare all of these runs. But this is the final update we'll have before we actually get to December. So I hope you have enjoyed the winter look ahead. It's not done as many this year as we have in prior years, I would like to spread them out a little bit more, but been fairly successful, at least with the wintry weather through November, and we'll have to see how we fare through December and as we head into January and February as well. So thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.